In this video, we're going to talk about one of the most dangerous things that you could possibly be doing when it comes to setting up your CNC router and carving your CNC router projects. Something that can literally wreck your machine and worse, hurt you. idcwoodcraft.com. Hello, my CNC brother or sister. I'm Garrett with idcwoodcraft.com, your CNC router bit supply company. And in this video, I'm going to talk about something that is so dangerous when it comes to your CNC router, probably the most dangerous thing you can do. And I'm going to teach you how not to do this. We're going to talk about how to chuck up your CNC router bits the proper way and the rules behind it. Now, what I mean by chucking up your CNC router bits is how far in or out should your router bit be sticking, how much should be in the collet, what are all the rules of thumb behind it, and what are the things that you should absolutely not do. Now, I'm shooting this video for a couple of reasons. Number one, I see way too many people in Facebook posts who are showing off the machines running, their carving, their amazing projects that they're making, and their router bits are set up dangerously. And number two, I see router bit supply companies advertising router bits set up improperly. And three, nobody seems to be teaching this thing. So you're going to learn about this. And the reason we're shooting this video is for three reasons. Number one, we don't want to break that $50 router bit that you just bought. Number two, we don't want to cause physical damage to your machine, literally where you have to replace components. When something like this happens and the bit is spinning at 20,000 RPMs, not only is it ruining your project, but it's going to bust up parts on your machine. Number three, and most important, is to avoid injury to you. When this happens, stuff goes flying, and sometimes that can even go flying. It goes right at you. It's not going to stop at your safety glasses. We want to keep you and whoever's standing around you safe. So you're going to learn the rules of thumb of chucking up your CNC router bits and what you should absolutely not do. To define chucking up on a CNC router bit, we're talking about inserting your router bit into the collet of the router, whether it is a trim router like the Makita here that we have on the long mill MK2, which is a CNC router I recommend as a good starter machine. It's very economical, yet it's very robust. I'll got a review video that I've done on this if you want to check it out. There'll be a link down below, and I will link below everything I talk about. Okay, so we're talking about if you chuck up or clamp your CNC router bit in the spindle just like this, or if you have a machine with a spindle on it and it has the ER series type of collets, we're talking about how far in that collet the router bit should stick as a rule of thumb. So first one we're going to talk about are the straight bits. These are bits that have a 1/4 inch shank, and then it's a 1/4 inch all the way down, or we have an 1/8 inch shank, it's an 1/8 inch all the way down. Here we've got a 1/4 inch shank, 3/16 down on the cutting area. And then we'll talk about the big body, the massive bits that have a lot of mass to them. So when it comes to end mills like this, like the beast here, this is a very aggressive roughing end mill that's designed to remove a lot of material really fast, save you a lot of time on your CNC projects, which is available at idcwoodcraft.com only. So on end mills, we have our flutes, or our cuts in the cutting tool itself. And that cut goes all the way up to a certain point. So we have a cutting area. Let me zoom in just a little bit. We have a cutting area all the way up to about here. And yet the flutes are still cut up even further up to there. Same with the 1/8 inch. We've got a cutting area, and then we've got about an 1/8 of an inch extra grind as the grinding tool has left the cut flute area. We want to take into account the diameter of the bit and reference the end of the last grind up the bit. So in this case, we've got a 1/4 inch bit. What we want to do is insert that to about a 1/4 of an inch past that cut. So basically what we're going to do is take the diameter of the bit and leave that same distance right above the top cut. So that would be about a 1/4 inch up. Now you can see right here, it actually looks like there's more being grabbed, but there's not. This is a 3/16 diameter bit, and then it tapers out, and our last final grind is right there. And we have about a 1/4 inch space from the last grind all the way up to where the cut is. When it comes to an 1/8 inch diameter bit, like this 1/8 inch ball nose, which is very good for 3D carving, we want to be an 1/8 inch above that last flute. This is the best possible way that you can clamp your end mills or chuck up on your end mills. Now you can go a little further if you want, that's okay, but this is just a general rule of thumb. You get a feel for it and you just insert it in there that much. But what you don't want to do is chuck down onto the grind, meaning you don't want to come down and have your collet down like that. Now we're going to take this one apart so I can demonstrate this a little bit better. One of the other things you always want to do whenever you change a router bit is always clean the sawdust out of here. Now I've already cleaned this out, but sawdust will act like a lubricant in the collet, and your router bit will slip over time. It'll literally, as it's making its carve, it'll slowly start to come out because sawdust in here acts like a lubricant. So you don't want to have that going on. So always clean it out. I'll blow it out, and sometimes I'll take a toothbrush to get all that sawdust out. So when we chuck up and we're inserting that, I'm estimating about a 1/4 inch from that last cut to the top of the collet. And that's where I'm going to chuck up at. When it comes to an ER style collet, you can see there's a bit of a pocket in here, but it still follows the same rule. When you stick that router bit into the ER collet, you want it to be about a 1/4 inch, just like that, and you'll get your best performance, and that'll minimize router bit deflection. Bit deflection is something that always happens with all router bits, even though it seems really stiff. As it's making this cut, there will be a little bit of deflection like that will show up. And of course, the more rigid you make it, the less deflection there is. So if you're sticking out way like that, you're going to have more deflection down here. Now, you want to make sure you don't. You see the cut right there on the end of this beast. You don't want that to be inside the collet like that. That's just something that absolutely no not to do. Now the reason we don't want that router bit up inside the collet where the cuts are 2 reasons. Number one, now you're losing your evenness of the grip of the collet around the round part. In other words, it's grabbing on areas where there's nothing to grab onto, and that'll start to cause wear in your collet. But more importantly, now you are throwing some stress onto your bit because now it's clamping onto uneven areas or areas that don't have a full diameter that the collet can grab onto. And what can happen is, as you're tightening that bit down, it can literally break your bit right there just because you're throwing a really strange stress into the bit. These are made of carbide, solid carbide. And so carbide it's a strong metal, but it's also can be brittle too. I mean, it doesn't give a whole lot. So that's the reason why we never want to have those cuts up inside the collet like I just showed you. Now you'll notice that in this case, I'm about a 1/4 inch, and it's not clamped all the way up the shank. That doesn't matter. These are designed to sit up in a taper, and that taper is going to squeeze all the way down equally on your bit. And also when the nut comes up, that nut is going to squeeze this side on the ER collet too. So you're going to get nice even pressure. Now, one of the things that I see too often is when people are sticking the bit out so far, they're trying to get as much reach out of the bit as possible because they have a deep cut, and they'll be clamped in maybe like that much. And you're talking about something that's that long with the feeds and speeds on something like this kind of setup, they are very different. But the problem here is there's almost no material being held for the bit up in the collet. And what that's going to do is, if you can see inside, we are now barely chucked up on the bit inside that collet. And that is going to start to cause some deformation inside the collet. Most collets are case hardened. Then what that means is they're hardened on the outside a few atoms thick, but underneath that it's a softer metal, and that will start to deform and you'll ruin the collet. But the worst part about this is, as that's making its cut, there's so much stress against it and you haven't adjusted your feeds and speeds properly to compensate for this, that you'll break the bit right up here. It'll just snap. So you never ever want to just hold just a little bit of your bit. The other thing is, it's much easier for that bit to pop out like that, and it could fly at you. It'll ruin a project. So never ever try to get as much possible reach as you can out of a bit by just putting a little bit in. Now in the Makita collet, this has a grip area from the bottom up to the end of that little saw cut right in here. And what that means is that bit should be at least that far into the collet, so the entire bit is grabbing the collet, or the entire grabbing part of the collet is holding the bit. But again, you're following this rule of thumb. Now you can extend out a little bit if you're trying to get some reach, but we still have a long way to go, and that's what we want. Now, one of the things that people say sometimes when you're putting your bit in your collet is they will say you never want to run that bit all the way up so it touches the bottom of the shaft. So I'm going to shove that up in there, and bam, now it has bottomed out up in this area up here inside the shaft. And I've heard people say that you should never do that. I don't agree with that. It's not that big of a deal. You have pressure coming down. There's no room for slip of the bit going upward, so that's an okay justification. But they'll say that there's heat transfer that's going directly into your tool. You should not have a whole lot of heat coming into your tool if your speeds and feeds are set right. So I wouldn't worry about touching the top inside the hole so much as I would worry about the distance that you have right here. All right, so that's what you want to take into account with the straight shank bits. Number one, don't try to get as much possible reach and only grab just a little bit like that. You're going to wear out your collet really fast, and the likelihood that you're going to break your router bit is going to be very, very high, or the bit's going to pop out and it's going to damage the collet. One way or another, you're trying to cut corners. If you need to get the reach, you need to go find a longer router bit. And that is exactly why at idcwoodcraft.com we have extra long router bits, so you don't have to try to squeeze out as much length as you can out of your standard bits. Got them specifically because of this. Because people like to make deeper project, guitar bodies or the bowls, what have you. We have long router bits like this, so you can grab the whole shank and still get all the depth. The extra long 1/4 inch down cutting end mill, the hog, which is one badass bit. This will save you a ton of time in your projects. If you don't have it, you want to get it anyway. And of course the extra long 1/8 down cutting router bit. If you're planning on doing any deep cuts, don't cheat the system. Get router bits that are designed for that. I will link these down below in the description of this video. You can buy them independently or you can get them as a set. The whole thing right here is a set. It's called the Guitar Maker's set. It's really built for anything where you're doing deep cuts. Just don't try to cheat yourself by trying to get out as much length as you can out of a bit. You're asking for trouble. The second thing, and more important, is when it comes to these wide body bits. Now, the IDC Woodcraft wide body bits are called the Big Stiffy series, and that's for a reason. I have specifically designed these with shorter shafts to help prevent people from setting these up improperly. Now we have this one right here, and what somebody did was they chucked up about that far on this bit. You can see it right there. So they're trying to get as much out of it as they can. And we don't want to do that with these larger bits. I've seen advertisers, CNC router bit companies advertise their bits in the machines hanging out even further with these wide body, massive bodies at the end. And it's so dangerous to do that. These, you should be at least 2/3 the way up the shank inside your collet at a minimum. So we have about 1.5 inches here, so we want to be 1 inch inside that. And you see I've got a little bit there. Ideally, you are going to be butted up against there. Now that's not always possible when you're getting ready to carve a bowl. So you can come on down to about 2/3, 1/3 the distance of the shank, and you'll be okay. But you never ever try to grab just a little bit. Again, there's two things that happened here. The bit came in too aggressively and it might have hit something. The collet wasn't tight enough. Who knows what could have been. The machine could have been loose, but nevertheless, this thing bent. And imagine this mass, I mean, you can feel it, it's heavy, swinging around this at 20,000 RPMs. You're going to shake things loose, and it's definitely going to kick out your project and ruin it. So on bits like this, whenever possible, get that thing all the way up in there and tighten up. And if you need a little bit more, you can go 1/3 the distance of the shank. This is exactly why I made these with shorter shanks, so that this will avoid things like this. Now, why did this bend in the first place? These are designed 4140 steel, but I don't want them so hard that if that actually does catch something that it breaks, because I don't want this bit flying at you. I would rather ruin your machine than have this piece of metal flying at you. So that's the other rule of thumb. These ideally will be all the way in, 1/3 of the distance out. Same thing with your ER collets. Ideally all the way in. That's not always the case that you can follow, but you can go 1/3 of the shank distance out. Next, I'm going to be talking to you about how tight you should tighten your collet after you've got your router bit in there, because of course you can under tighten it, make it too loose, but you can also over tighten it. So we'll get to that one in a minute. I just got to rehash this because this is so important. It's the most dangerous thing you can do if you don't set your router bit up right in the collet. When you have a straight shank collet like an end mill, not just straight shank, all shanks are straight, but like an end mill like this, consider the diameter of the shank and the very last grind, and the rule of thumb is that should be slipped up into the collet to the diameter length of the shank. So if this is a 1/4 inch diameter shank, 1/4 inch above that last cut is the ideal place where that starts into the collet. You also do not want to try to get as much reach out of the bit as you can by grabbing just a little bit at the end. You're going to ruin your collet. You're going to get a lot more bit deflection. You'll break the bit. It's going to pop out of the collet. It's going to damage the collet. But if you need to get a little extra length out of your bit, make sure the entire collet clamping area is clamping on the bit. In other words, the clamping area in the ER collet is this far up where my finger is. That much should absolutely be inside the collet, just like that. So now the whole thing is clamping. The big body bits, whenever possible, bring that all the way up into the collet, like butt it up against the collet. If you're going to stick it out, which is okay, 1/3 the length of the shank for the IDC Woodcraft Big Stiffy Series bits. That's intentionally, I've left these shanks short to prevent you from trying to get as much as you can out of it. I've seen advertisers have their bits hanging way out. It is so dangerous, scares the hell out of me every time. So 1/3 out, you're getting into yellow zone if you go halfway out. It's okay, but you got to start being really careful with your setup and think about how your router bit is coming into the project. Because if it slams in a project, then you can start getting cases like this. And we don't want that. All right, this will wreck your machine. If it breaks, it's going to wreck you. All right, let's talk a little bit about clamping your collets, the right way to clamp them so that you don't over clamp them, and then we'll be done. When we're setting this thing up to clamp, and this goes for all CNC router style spindles or trim routers. First of all, this is a 1/4 inch shank. I'm kind of putting my finger right there so I know the length. I'm going to bring that up into the collet and generally just hold it there. I'll push the yellow button, or the red button, I don't know where I got yellow from. Bring it down till it grabs it. It's in there now. So here's what we do. Number one, on the Makita routers, don't ever use this red button as something to work against, meaning don't hold that in and try to tighten your machine down. What you're doing is you're stressing all the aluminum here, and eventually it's going to fracture. I've seen way too many people doing that, and it ruins the housing. That means you have to go out and buy a new one. So make sure you use both wrenches whenever they're available. I know that some of the machine companies only provide this one and expect you to use this button here. But you have to know how to tighten these things down in order not to cause damage to your housing. So we're putting the small wrench onto the shaft. There's a little cut in the shaft so that the wrench fits on there. And then of course this one is over the nut. So what I'm doing is I'm bringing it out, and we've cleaned the collet, by the way. You always want to clean the collet. I'm bringing it out until I can feel it definitely grab. Now, I'm putting maybe 10 pounds of force on it total, 5 maybe. So everything has stopped now. I'm pushing on it and nothing's moving. So I know and I can feel that it grabbed that router bit. Now what I'm going to do is just give it a little extra push. That was it. That router bit is in there nice and tight. What you don't want to do is crank down super tight and just keep on doing it. That router bit has been clamped down onto a shaft, or a shaft, this hole, all the way around. And the strongest holding power you can get out of anything is when it's grabbing the entire diameter of your router bit, which is what all collets are designed to do. So don't over tighten this. That will also cause wear to your collet, premature wear, and you'll have to replace it soon. When you get premature wear in a collet, then what happens is you start to lose its trueness, and it actually gets too shiny on the inside, too smooth, and then it'll start to slip as it's making this cut, no matter how tight you're making this. So if you even think that you're going to be making projects on your CNC router that are going to require longer bits than what you have, then you definitely want to get extended length bits in your arsenal or when you're planning a project. So at idcwoodcraft.com, we have the extended length 1/4 inch down cutter, the 1/4 inch extended length hog, and of course the extended length 1/8 inch down cutter. Also, if you feel like this video has helped you out, I would love to have a comment down below. If it helped you, it'll help other people. By commenting, the video gets ranked higher in YouTube. Thumbs up always helps as well. And if you have anything else you'd like to contribute to what I shared here to help others, put it down in the comments and then I'll add it to the description. idcwoodcraft.com